Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has claimed a United States military build-up in the Caribbean is aimed at overthrowing his government. Mr. Maduro's remarks come a day after a US military strike that killed 11 people during an attack on a vessel from Venezuela, allegedly carrying illegal narcotics. US Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth has warned more military strikes against Venezuelan drug targets are coming. With more, I'm joined by Eric Bezalel, who is a national security reporter at Politico. Thank you very much for your time, Eric.
Thank you for having me, Catherine.
What do you know about this strike and where the boat was headed?
Yes. So the military has not released more information about where exactly from Venezuela it left, where it was headed. But, the United States government at this point has alleged that it was affiliated with a gang known as Tren de Aragua, which has been a large target of Republican messaging even before the Trump administration came into office. Tren de Aragua was designated a foreign terrorist organization by the Trump administration earlier this year. And, we've seen the U.S. government lay the legal groundwork for much more aggressive strikes against foreign terrorist organizations. And under that branch, they've decided to list transnational criminal organizations in places such as Mexico, El Salvador, and Venezuela. And, the Secretary of Defense today signaled that this is the first, but it won't be the last, as we've seen.
Just on the legalities of that, Eric, I believe that President Trump is using a wartime measure to do that. So it's within the law?
What we know so far is that this strike was in the international waters off of Venezuela. So that opens some degree of legal debate about, it's not, if it was in Venezuelan waters, it would be a much more different conversation. But because it's in international waters, there's a little more ambiguity. The United States, of course, has broad laws about anti-terrorism and authorizing the military to use force against terrorists. And since January, we've seen the administration ratchet up over time the legal justifications under American law to launch this. Last month, there was a memo at the Pentagon that allowed for the authorization of military force against these criminal organizations. And there was a lot of questions about which countries it would target first, whether it was Mexico or Haiti or Venezuela. But what we've seen now is that Venezuelan criminal organizations were the first ones that are being targeted under this new policy, and that they've been getting to this point for a while.
Marco Rubio has used language such as wage combat on drug cartels. Does this lethal strike on the alleged drug vessel represent a shift in US policy?
100%. Before, when we were talking about, any kind of anti-drug policy, especially when it came to Latin America, we were focused so much more on production. When we saw Plan Colombia, it was spraying chemicals to kill, coca production and eliminate coca plants in the fields. And now we're seeing, and the Coast Guard has always done interceptions off of American waters. It's partnered with allies before to intercept, deliveries from transnational criminal groups that are trying to smuggle this kind of contraband into the United States. But using this level of lethal force, a sophisticated strike from American vessels and using American hard power, that is certainly a very unprecedented development in U.S. drug policy and U.S. policy towards the region.
What do you make of the claims by the Venezuelan President Maduro saying that the U.S. military build-up in the Caribbean is aimed at overthrowing his government?
When we look at that, we also have to take note that when U.S. officials have been asked about whether they will support it, they have always, demurred. They have said that this is a presidential decision, but they are preparing all the assets that are necessary. There are plenty of people in Washington, analysts, former officials, who are looking at what's available on open source and casting some doubts about the current status of this. When the U.S. invaded Panama, there were 27,000 U.S. troops and a lot more military hard power in the region at its disposal. Grenada, which is a much, it's a small island in the Caribbean, saw 7,300 troops. There's only a couple thousand Marines, a couple thousand ships in the Caribbean around Venezuela. So it does not seem imminent that there is that. The U.S. military's strategic calculations, even if they use drones or other things, the thinking in Washington is that not yet. Perhaps in the future, perhaps that option hasn't been ruled out yet, but not imminently. Based on that is at least the consensus view from folks that I've spoken to, and that others have, what we hear from the administration and from outside of government.
Not imminent, but as you just outlined there, you touched on this long history of military force in drug wars with America and the South, Manuel Noriega, etc. Do you think we might see a return to, say, the Bush Senior era?
It's very difficult to say because even with the Bush senior era, we had all sorts of different kinds of tools in the national security toolbox that don't exist anymore. There would be these interventions or there would be these more aggressive actions, but they would also be coupled with soft power tools like foreign aid and cultural diplomacy and boosting economic development. So it's very hard we'll never quite go back to that era. The administration has been very clear that they're going to think about foreign aid in different ways. We've already even seen just the ways that they're trying to build the partnerships in this. So it's very difficult to say, but certainly there is a willingness to use force differently than what we've seen in recent memory, certainly even from the first Trump administration in this administration.
Eric Bezalel-Amil, national security reporter at Politico. Many thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me.